Story: The Butcher's Bill on Needle Rock Ridge. Before it was a place of ghosts, it was a place of beauty. From the decks of the USS Henrico, Okinawa was an emerald jewel set in a sapphire sea. To the young men of the 96th Infantry Division, the Deadeyes, it looked deceptively peaceful. They were veterans, most of them, bearing the psychic scars of Leyte. They knew that beauty in this war was a liar. It was a mask worn by death. Our story focuses on a handful of these men, souls bound together in the crucible of K Company. There was Sergeant Frank Miller, Sarge, a man from the steel mills of Pennsylvania, whose hands were as calloused as his heart. He'd stopped counting the fresh-faced replacements who had passed through his squad. He just focused on the ones still breathing. Then there was Corporal Diaz, a wiry kid from East LA, who cradled his Browning automatic rifle like a lover. His humor was as black as the grave, a shield against the things he'd seen. And finally, there was Private First Class Costello, a boy of 19 from the cornfields of Ohio. His eyes still held a flicker of that hometown innocence, a flame Sarge knew this war was determined to extinguish. They landed on April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday and April Fool's Day, a cosmic joke that wasn't lost on men like Diaz. The initial push inland was eerily quiet, too quiet. The Japanese, under the command of the cunning General Mitsuru Ushijima, had abandoned the beaches. They had drawn a line in the earth, a series of concentric defensive rings anchored by ancient castles and formidable terrain. This was the Shuri Line, and the outermost gate to this hell was a geological nightmare called the Urasoe Moji Escarpment. The GIs had other names for it. To the men who had to attack it, it was a sawtooth monster of coral and limestone that rose 500 feet from the ground. It was a jagged spine of rock, honeycombed with caves, pillboxes, and interlocking tunnels that had been fortified for months. It was a fortress built by nature and perfected by a fanatical enemy. They called it Cactus Ridge, the Big Escarpment, and, most famously, Hacksaw Ridge. But there was one particular section, a sheer cliff face, bristling with machine gun nests and mortar pits, that earned a darker name. The men who came before K Company, men from the 383rd Infantry, had been shattered against its rocks. They whispered of it in the aid stations, their eyes wide with shell shock. They said the ridge itself was alive. They said it screamed at night. They called it Needle Rock. And soon, they would call it Ghost Hill. All right, listen up. Sarge's voice was a low, gravelly rasp, cutting through the humid Okinawan air. They were huddled in a muddy trench, a mile from the escarpment. The constant dull thump, thump, thump of distant artillery was the unholy heartbeat of this island. Intel says the 383rd got chewed to pieces trying a frontal assault. We're not doing that. We're going to try and flank the western slope, a place they call Needle Rock. Diaz spat a stream of tobacco juice. Catchy name, sounds inviting. It's a butcher shop, Sarge said, his eyes scanning the faces of his men. He lingered on Costello, who was gripping his M1 Garand so tightly his knuckles were white. The Japs are dug in deeper than ticks on a hound. They've got tunnels connecting every position. You shoot one, two more pop up behind you. They're like ghosts. The word hung in the air. Ghosts. The approach was a slow, agonizing crawl through a landscape of ruin. The idyllic countryside had been churned into a brown, stinking porridge of mud, shell craters, and the debris of war. The sweet smell of hibiscus was replaced by the cloying metallic stench of cordite and death. Okinawan tombs, ancient, turtle shell-shaped structures of stone, dotted the landscape. Many had been desecrated, turned into Japanese machine gun nests. The spirits of the ancestors, the men whispered, were angry. As they got closer to the ridge, a palpable sense of dread descended upon them. The air grew heavy, still. The ridge loomed over them, a silent, gray monolith against a bruised sky. It didn't look like a piece of geography. It looked like a predator, waiting. I don't like this, Sarge, Costello whispered, his voice trembling slightly. It feels wrong, like we're being watched by a million eyes. That's because we are, kid. Diaz grunted, chambering a round in his BAR. And they're all behind triggers. But it was more than that. Even Sarge, the hardened pragmatist, felt it. A cold finger tracing its way down his spine. The wind sighing through the jagged coral formations sounded like whispers. Faint, sibilant, speaking a language he didn't understand, but whose meaning was crystal clear. Turn back. The attack began at dawn, under the cover of a rolling artillery barrage that shook the very bones of the earth. The world dissolved into a symphony of destruction. Shells screamed overhead, exploding against the face of the ridge in blossoms of fire and black smoke. Go! 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 Sarge yelled, and they scrambled from their holes, running low, their boots sucking at the mud. They had barely covered 50 yards when the ridge answered. It wasn't a single eruption of fire, but 1,000, from unseen holes, from camouflage slits in the rock. From deep within the shadowed maws of caves, the Japanese opened up. The air became a solid wall of lead, the distinct sharp crack of Arasaka rifles, the frantic high-pitched chatter of Nambu light machine guns, and the terrifying thwump 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 of the knee mortars that rained down grenades with pinpoint accuracy. Men screamed and fell. The green grass turned dark with blood. A Marine next to Costello simply vanished in a pink mist as a mortar round landed at his feet. Costello froze, his mind blank with terror, the world slowing down to a silent, horrifying ballet of death. "Move, Costello, goddammit, move!" Sarge tackled him, dragging him behind the meager cover of a shattered tombstone. Bullets ricocheted off the stone, whining like angry hornets. "They're everywhere!" Costello cried, his face buried in the mud. "We can't see them!" That was the horror of Needle Rock. They weren't fighting an army, they were fighting a mountain. The Japanese soldiers were phantoms, firing a few rounds from one spider hole before vanishing into the earth, only to reappear in another position yards away. It was a three-dimensional battlefield, and the Americans were trapped on the bloody floor. Diaz laid down a stream of suppressive fire with his bar, the weapon bucking in his arms. "Eat it, you bastards," he roared, but he was just shooting at rocks. He knew it. They all did. By midday, the attack had stalled. The slope was littered with the dead and dying. Cries of "medic" were swallowed by the cacophony of battle. They were pinned down, bleeding, with the sun beating down on them mercilessly. And then, the psychological warfare began. From the caves, the Japanese began to taunt them in broken English. "Hey GI, you die tonight. Marines, you will join your ancestors. FDR is dead, you have no president." But there were other sounds too. Sounds that weren't human. Costello heard it first, a low moaning, seeming to come from the rock itself. It sounded like a man in agony, but it was deeper, more resonant. "You hear that, Sarge?" he asked, his eyes wide. "It's the wind, kid, just the wind." But Sarge heard it too. It was the sound of 1,000 souls crying out in unison, the sound of the land itself, groaning under the weight of so much violence. Night fell, but it brought no relief. The darkness did not belong to them. It belonged to the ghosts. The shelling stopped, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. The men lay in their foxholes, every nerve screaming. They knew what was coming. The Japanese were masters of the night. The first sign was a flicker of movement at the edge of Costello's vision, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He blinked, and it was gone. He told himself it was his exhausted mind playing tricks. Then came the whispers. They were closer now, carried on the night breeze. Not taunts, but something else. Soft, insistent murmurings. Costello thought he heard his own name. Co-Stel-Lo. He squeezed his eyes shut, his heart hammering against his ribs. It's not real. It's not real. A scream tore through the night, sharp and brief, followed by a wet, gurgling sound. It was from a foxhole 20 feet away. "What was that?" someone hissed. "Stay down," Sarge commanded, his own voice tight with tension. They came like wraiths, cloaked in the darkness. Japanese soldiers, their faces grim, armed with bayonets, sharpened bamboo spears, and grenades. They moved with an unnerving silence, crawling on their bellies through the grass, navigating the battlefield of their own dead as if they were born to it. A shape rose over the lip of Diaz's foxhole. Diaz didn't hesitate. He fired a single shot from his .45, the roar of the pistol deafening in the night. The shape collapsed with a soft grunt. All along the line, the night erupted in a series of frantic, desperate, and intimately personal struggles. It was the war at its most primal, man against man, in the dark, with steel and fear. Grenades were thrown back and forth. Men wrestled in the mud, their hands locked around each other's throats. The screams were terrible because they were so close. Costello felt a presence near him. He didn't see or hear it, but the air grew cold. He slowly turned his head, his M1 at the ready. A figure was crouched, not 5 feet away, a long sword raised, silhouetted against the faint starlight. The face was a pale, demonic mask in the gloom. Time seemed to stop. Costello couldn't breathe. The sword started its downward arc. A burst from a BAR ripped the night apart. The figure jerked, spun, and fell. Diaz, from his position, had seen it. He gave Costello a slight nod in the darkness. Costello could only manage a shaky, grateful whimper. The attack lasted for an hour, but it felt like an eternity. When it was over, the silence that returned was heavier, more profound. It was filled with the groans of the newly wounded and the oppressive presence of the new dead. In the morning, they found that the Japanese had tied grenades to the bodies of fallen Americans, hoping a GI trying to recover his friend would set them off. The ridge had claimed more souls. It was feeding. The days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of horror. Each morning began with a morning hate, a massive artillery and naval gunfire barrage meant to soften the defenses. And each morning the GIs would attack, and each morning the ridge would bleed them dry. They tried everything. Flamethrowers were brought up, spewing liquid fire into the cave mouths. The screams that came from within were inhuman. The smell of burning flesh, a sickening incense that hung over the battlefield for days. But for every cave they sealed, another would be opened from within the labyrinthine tunnels. They used satchel charges. Engineers, men with a life expectancy measured in minutes, would sprint across open ground under withering fire, hurl a 20-pound bag of explosives into an opening, and pray they could get to cover before it detonated. The concussions would lift men off their feet. Rock and body parts would rain from the sky. Needle Rock became a charnel house. The bodies of both Americans and Japanese lay where they fell, bloating and decaying under the relentless Okinawan sun. The rains came, turning the shell-pocked ground into a crimson slurry. Maggots writhed in the open wounds of the dead. The stench was so overwhelming, so physically oppressive, that men vomited into their helmets. The living began to look like the dead. Their eyes were hollow, sunk deep into faces caked with mud and stubble. They moved with the shuffling gait of old men. They were haunted. Costello was slipping. The whispers were constant now. During the day, in the lulls between firefights, he would stare at the ridge, and he swore he could see them. Pale, translucent figures moving among the rocks. The ghosts of the GIs who had fallen, and the darker, more menacing spirits of the Japanese defenders. He saw a young Marine with a hole in his chest, eternally trying to crawl back to the American lines. He saw a Japanese officer with a burned face, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "Sarge, they're still there," he'd mutter, his M1 shaking in his hands. "They're waiting for us." Sarge would grab him by the collar. "Snap out of it, Costello. There's nothing there but rock and Japs. You focus on the Japs. You hear me? You let the ghosts go." But even Sarge was beginning to doubt. One night, while on watch, he saw it. A faint, greenish light pulsating deep within one of the larger caves. A cave that had been blasted shut by a satchel charge that morning. It was a cold corpse light, and it seemed to beat in time with that low, moaning sound that never quite went away. He didn't tell anyone. A sergeant couldn't afford to see ghosts. The battle for Needle Rock had become a battle of attrition. It wasn't about tactics anymore. It was about which side would break first. General Ushijima had ordered his men to take 10 American lives for every one of their own. On this ridge, they were exceeding their quota. The name Hacksaw Ridge was now spoken with a kind of grim reverence throughout the 96th Division. It was a place that unmade men. But this particular section, this Needle Rock, was worse. It didn't just kill you, it devoured your soul. The men of K Company stopped calling it Needle Rock. They only called it Ghost Hill. The breaking point came on the 8th day. After more than a week of throwing themselves against this unbreakable wall of rock and hate, a new plan was devised. It was desperate. It was suicidal. It was their only option left. They were going to go over the top. Not a frontal assault on the slope, but a direct, vertical climb up a sheer section of the cliff face at the far western edge, using cargo nets smuggled up under the cover of darkness. The plan was to secure a foothold on the summit and then fight their way down, clearing the ridge from the top. Sarge gathered what was left of his squad. There were only 7 of them now. "This is it," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We either take the top or we die on the ropes. There's no in-between." Diaz checked the action on his bar. "Well, the view should be nice before we buy the farm." Costello was quiet, his face a mask of grim resolve. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but something had changed. The ghosts he saw were no longer just terrifying apparitions. They were a reminder, a testament. He felt he owed them something. He had to end this. That night, under a sliver of a moon, they began the climb. The cargo nets, secured by engineers who had performed a minor miracle, hung like black webs against the dark rock. They climbed in silence, burdened by weapons, ammunition, and the weight of their own fear. Every sound was magnified. The scrape of a boot on rock, the clink of a canteen, the ragged sound of their own breathing. They expected the entire ridge to erupt in gunfire at any moment. But there was only silence. A heavy, watchful silence. Costello felt them again. The ghosts. They were all around him, their spectral forms swirling in the night air. He felt cold fingers brush against his neck, a whisper in his ear, "Jigoku, hell." He gritted his teeth and kept climbing. He was no longer afraid of them. He was one of them now, a ghost climbing a hill of ghosts. Sarge was the first one over the top. He belly-crawled onto the summit, his Thompson submachine gun at the ready. The top of the ridge was a hellscape of shattered rock and splintered trees, pockmarked with spider holes and the entrances to the tunnel network. One by one, the rest of the squad followed, fanning out into a defensive perimeter. They had done it. They were on top of Ghost Hill. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then, the earth itself seemed to vomit up the enemy. From holes they couldn't see, from camouflaged trapdoors, the Japanese defenders swarmed out. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were demons, their eyes wild with fanaticism, screaming banzai. They came with rifles, with grenades, with swords that glinted in the moonlight. The summit of Ghost Hill became a maelstrom of violence. It was a battle fought at arm's length. Muzzle flashes lit up the horrifying scene in brief, strobing tableaus. Sarge fired his Thompson in long, sweeping bursts, the .45 caliber slugs tearing through the charging enemy. Diaz's bar was a roaring beast, spitting fire and death, the hot brass cascading around him. Costello found himself face to face with a Japanese soldier, so close he could smell the rice and fish on his breath. There was no time to aim. He swung his M1 like a club, the steel butt plate connecting with the man's skull with a sickening crunch. He didn't have time to register the horror. Another was on him. He jammed the bayonet forward, a brutal, desperate thrust. The fighting dissolved into a chaotic, swirling melee. They were no longer a squad. They were individuals fighting for their own small patch of ground, for their next breath. They were outnumbered 10-1, and then they went into the tunnels. Sarge knew they couldn't hold the top if the enemy could keep reinforcing from below. "Diaz, Costello, with me," he yelled. "We're clearing the holes." Armed with grenades and trench guns, they plunged into the darkness. It was a descent into hell. The tunnels were narrow, suffocating, and stank of sweat, gunpowder, and damp earth. It was a blind fight. They would toss a grenade around a corner and press themselves against the wall as the concussion tore through the passage. They would fire their shotguns down dark corridors, the buckshot ricocheting off the rock walls. Costello was separated from the others. He found himself in a small, cavern-like room. In the center was a makeshift shrine with candles and offerings, and standing before it was a Japanese officer, a pistol in one hand, a sword in the other. He was not screaming or charging. He stood with a terrifying calm, his eyes locking onto Costello's. In that moment, Costello understood. This wasn't just a defensive position. This was their home, their tomb. They weren't defending a ridge, they were defending their own graves. The officer raised his pistol. Costello fired his M1. The single shot echoed like a thunderclap in the confined space. The officer fell. Costello stood there, shaking, his ears ringing. The battle raged on outside, but in this small, subterranean chamber, there was a profound and terrible silence. The ghosts were quiet. They took the ridge. By dawn, the fighting was over. Reinforcements had arrived, and the last pockets of resistance were systematically and brutally eliminated. Sarge, Diaz, and Costello stood on the summit of Ghost Hill, looking out over the battlefield. They were covered in blood, mud, and the grime of battle. They were alive. The ridge was silent now. The morning sun cast long shadows across the churned-up earth. It was a wasteland, littered with the corpses of hundreds of men. The cost had been staggering. The butcher's bill had been paid in full, but the name remained: Ghost Hill. The war moved on. The 96th Division would continue its bloody advance south. But a part of them, a part of every man who fought there, would remain forever on that jagged spine of rock in Okinawa. Sergeant Frank Miller would survive the war, but he would never again be able to stand the silence of the night without hearing whispers on the wind. Corporal Diaz would carry the scars of his wounds, but the deeper scars were the ones no one could see. And Private First Class Costello, the boy from Ohio, left his innocence buried in a dark tunnel on that hill. He returned home a man, but a man haunted by the ghosts he had met and the ones he had made. The Urasoe Escarpment, the real-life Hacksaw Ridge, stands to this day. The locals say that on certain nights, when the moon is thin and the wind blows from the sea, you can still hear them, the whispers of the GIs, the defiant cries of the Japanese defenders, and the low, sorrowful moan of the land itself. It is a monument not of stone, but of memory and pain. It is a testament to the fact that some places, once consecrated by so much blood and terror, can never truly be peaceful again. They are forever the domain of ghosts. They are forever Ghost Hill. Of his wounds, but the deeper scars were the ones no one could see. And Private First Class Costello, the boy from Ohio, left his innocence buried in a dark tunnel on that hill. He returned home a man, but a man haunted by the ghosts he had met and the ones he had made. The Urasoe Escarpment, the real-life Hacksaw Ridge, stands to this day. The locals say that on certain nights, when the moon is thin and the wind blows from the sea, you can still hear them, the whispers of the GIs, the defiant cries of the Japanese defenders, and the low, sorrowful moan of the land itself. It is a monument not of stone, but of memory and pain. It is a testament to the fact that some places, once consecrated by so much blood and terror, can never truly be peaceful again. They are forever the domain of ghosts. They are forever Ghost Hill. Story: The Girl of Naha General. You ask me what I remember about Okinawa. Most people who serve there will tell you about the heat. They'll talk about that thick, wet blanket of humidity that smothers you the second you step off the plane at Kadena, a heat that clings to your skin and never truly leaves. They'll talk about the typhoons that scream in from the Pacific, turning the sky into a bruised, violent canvas. They'll talk about the food, the vibrant chaos of Kokusai Street, the impossible turquoise of the water. I remember all of that. But when I close my eyes, when the night is too quiet and the house settles into its bones, I don't feel the heat. I feel a chill. A deep, penetrating cold that has nothing to do with temperature. And I hear a sound, a soft, rhythmic sound. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It's the sound that brought me back from Okinawa in a medevac chopper. Not with a wound you can see, but with one that carved itself into my soul. It's the sound of the girl with no legs. This happened in the summer of 2009. I was a 20-year-old airman first class, barely a year into my enlistment, and stationed at Kadena Air Base. My name is Alex. Back then, I was cocky, stupid, and thought I was invincible. A holy trinity of traits for any young man in uniform thousands of miles from home. My world was the base, a sprawling slice of America dropped onto a subtropical island. And my life revolved around my work on the flight line, drinking too much cheap beer at the Rocker NCO Club, and finding ways to kill the oppressive boredom. My crew, my chosen family, consisted of 3 others. There was Marcus, a Marine from a different unit over at Futenma. He was the archetype of a jarhead. Loud, built like a vending machine, and with a bravado that bordered on pathological. He feared nothing, or at least, he'd never admit to it. Then, there was Chloe, another Air Force kid like me, working in communications. She was sharp, witty, and the grounding force in our group. The voice of reason that we usually ignored. And then there was Kenji. Kenji was the outlier. He was Okinawan, born and raised in Naha. We met him through his job at a small ramen shop just outside Gate 2, a place we frequented religiously. He was quiet, thoughtful, and carried the weight of his island's history in his gentle eyes. He was fascinated by our loud, clumsy American ways, and we were drawn to his calm authenticity. He was our bridge to the real Okinawa, the one that existed beyond the barbed wire fences of the base. Our nights were a predictable cycle of cheap thrills. We'd drive down to American Village for overpriced burgers, or hit the bars in Koza, but eventually, we'd run out of sanctioned fun. That's when the bad ideas would start to brew, usually fermented by Marcus and a few too many Orion beers. "I'm bored," Marcus declared one sweaty Tuesday night, slamming his empty mug on the sticky table of our favorite off-base izakaya. "I've seen every shrine, every beach. I need something more." "More what?" Chloe asked, scrolling through her phone. "More ways to get an Article 15? More real," Marcus insisted, leaning forward. His eyes had that manic glint they got when he was cooking up something reckless. "I want to see the stuff they don't put in the tourist brochures, the dark stuff." Kenji, who had been quietly sipping his tea, looked up. His expression was serious. "There are places you should not go," Marcus sung. "Places with bad history, bad energy." "See, that's what I'm talking about," Marcus boomed, slapping the table. "Ghost stories, spooky shit. Let's do it. You gotta know a place, Kenji." Kenji hesitated, a deep reluctance clouding his face. "There are many such places. Okinawa, our history is filled with ghosts. The war left many scars on the land and on people." "Come on, man, don't be cryptic," I chimed in, caught up in the thrill of it. "Tell us one." Kenji sighed, the sound barely audible over the din of the bar. He looked from face to face, as if gauging our sincerity or perhaps our foolishness. He settled on a story. He told us about an old abandoned hospital in the twisting back streets of Naha, the old Naha General. It had been a military hospital, first for the Japanese Imperial Army, then taken over by the Americans after the war. It was a place of immense suffering, he explained. During the Battle of Okinawa, it was a charnel house. Wounded soldiers, terrified civilians, they died in the hundreds in its halls. After the war, it served the community for a few decades before being decommissioned, replaced by a newer, modern facility. The old building was left to rot. "They say it is one of the most haunted places on the island," Kenji said, his voice low. "People who go there hear things, screams, crying. They see shadows of soldiers walking the halls. But there is one story, one ghost, that everyone fears." He paused, and the air around our table seemed to grow colder, thicker. "They call her Kuroi Ashi, the girl with black legs, or rather no legs at all." According to Kenji's story, she was a young nurse or a civilian girl. The details were lost to time, who was caught in a bombing raid. An American shell hit the ward she was in, and she was severed in half at the waist. In her dying moments, delirious from pain and shock, she began to crawl, trying to find the lower half of her body. "They say she never stopped looking," Kenji whispered, his eyes wide and dark. "Trespassers, kids on a dare, they go into the hospital at night. They'll be walking down a dark corridor, and they'll hear a sound, a scraping, a dragging." He leaned in closer. We were all completely silent, hanging on his every word. Then they see her, crawling towards them on her elbows, her torso dragging on the filthy floor. She looks up at them with empty eyes and asks, in a voice like dry leaves skittering on pavement. He dropped his voice to a horrifying whisper. "Watashi no ashi wo mimasen deshita ka?" "What's that mean?" Marcus asked, though his usual bravado was noticeably absent. "Have you seen my legs?" Kenji translated. And if you can't answer, or if you scream, she chases you. And they say she is impossibly fast. A shiver traced its way down my spine. The bar suddenly felt too loud, too bright. Marcus, however, recovered quickly. He let out a forced, booming laugh. That's brilliant. Best damn ghost story I've ever heard. A chick cut in half, crawling around? That's metal as hell. We have to go. No, Kenji said, the word sharp and final. We do not. It is not a story, Marcus-san. It is a warning. It's a place of great sadness. You don't mock the dead. I'm not mocking them, I'm visiting them, Marcus shot back, grinning. Paying my respects. Come on, Alex. You're in, right? Chloe? Chloe shook her head, her arms crossed. Absolutely not. I've seen enough horror movies to know how this ends. You guys are idiots. I'm with Chloe, I said, though a part of me, the stupid, thrill-seeking part, was buzzing with a dark curiosity. The argument went on for another hour. Marcus was relentless, calling us cowards, teasing, cajoling. Kenji remained firm, a stone wall of quiet refusal. Chloe was immovable. I, however, was the weak link. The idea had planted a seed in my mind, a morbid fascination that was starting to sprout. A crawling girl with no legs. The image was both terrifying and irresistible. Eventually, a week later, Marcus wore me down. It was another night of soul-crushing boredom. We had a 3-day weekend, and the prospect of spending it doing the same old thing was unbearable. Tonight's the night, man, he said, cornering me outside the barracks. Just you and me. Chloe's on duty and Kenji's a no-go. We'll be in and out, just a peek, get some pictures, prove we did it. And like the fool I was, I agreed. The decision hangs in my memory like a verdict. It was the moment I chose the path that led into the darkness. We drove to Naha in Marcus's beat-up Toyota, a rust bucket he'd bought for a few $100s. The city's neon glow gave way to darker, quieter residential streets. We didn't talk much. The bravado from the bar had evaporated, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. I had a heavy maglite in my hand, its weight a poor substitute for real courage. Marcus had a smaller, tactical flashlight and his phone. You sure you know where this place is? I asked, my voice tight. Kenji gave me the general area that night, Marcus grunted, squinting at the winding, narrow streets. Said it was near the old aqueduct. Can't be too hard to find. An abandoned hospital should stick out. He was right. We rounded a corner and there it was. It wasn't just a building, it was a wound in the landscape. A 5-story concrete behemoth, stained black with years of rain and mold, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the moonless, hazy sky. Every window was a black, vacant eye socket. A crumbling wall surrounded the property, topped with rusted barbed wire that drooped like sad, thorny vines. The main gate was chained shut, a faded, peeling sign in kanji warning trespassers away. Holy, I breathed. Bingo, Marcus said, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. He killed the engine and the headlights, plunging us into an oppressive darkness. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the frantic chirping of cicadas. We found a section of the wall that had collapsed, creating an easy, rubble-strewn entry point. The air inside the grounds was different, stagnant, heavy. The smell hit me first. A cloying mix of damp earth, rotting vegetation, and something else. Something faintly chemical and sterile, the ghost of antiseptic. The hospital loomed over us, a silent, brooding giant. The main entrance was a gaping maw, the glass doors shattered long ago. We stood there for a long moment, the reality of our stupidity sinking in. Second thoughts? Marcus whispered, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Many, I admitted. Too late now. He clicked on his flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a sharp white cone through the darkness, the illuminating dust motes dancing in the dead air. Let's go. Stepping over the threshold was like stepping into another world, another time. The air inside was freezing, a sudden, shocking drop in temperature that had my skin erupting in goosebumps. It was the cold of a tomb. The lobby was a scene of utter dereliction. A reception desk lay on its side like a dead animal. Ripped and water-stained patient files were scattered across the floor, their Japanese script a cryptic record of forgotten suffering. A gurney with a single, rusted wheel stood sentinel in the middle of the room, its leather straps cracked and broken. Our footsteps crunched on fallen plaster and broken glass, the sound deafening in the profound silence. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice a low thrum. "Ground floor first. Let's see what we can find." We moved cautiously, our flashlight beams sweeping across the terrifying tableau. We passed rooms with overturned beds, mattresses stained with dark, unidentifiable blotches. We saw medical equipment from a bygone era, rusted metal trays, strange-looking chrome instruments, and glass vials, some of which were still intact, their contents a murky, sinister brown. The walls were covered in graffiti, a mix of Japanese and English. But beneath the spray paint, there were darker marks, long, deep scratches in the plaster, as if a wild animal had been trapped inside. And everywhere, there was that smell, decay, dust, and that sweet metallic tang that made the back of my throat clench. Old blood. We found the emergency room. It was worse. A row of operating theaters branched off a central corridor. We peered into one. A massive, archaic operating lamp hung over a rusted metal table, angled down as if still waiting for a patient. On a small tray next to it lay a single, horrifying instrument. A bone saw, its teeth caked in a dark, flaky rust. I felt a wave of nausea. "Marcus, man, I think I've seen enough." "We haven't even been upstairs yet," he countered, though his own flashlight beam was starting to tremble slightly. "That's where the good stuff is. Wards. Patient rooms." Against my better judgment, I followed him to the main stairwell. The concrete steps were slick with dampness. As we ascended, a new sound joined our footsteps, the drip, drip, drip of water from somewhere deep within the building's guts. The second floor was more of the same, a long corridor of patient rooms. Each door was ajar, opening onto a scene of quiet devastation. We were walking past one room when my light caught something. I stopped, backtracking. Inside, sitting perfectly in the center of the dusty floor, was a single small child's shoe. It was an old-fashioned leather sandal, impossibly well preserved. "Check this out," I whispered. Marcus came over, shining his light on it. Creepy, probably just left behind, but as he said it, from deep down the hallway, we heard a noise. A soft giggle. It was faint, ethereal, and unmistakably the sound of a little girl. We froze, our blood turning to ice. We snapped our heads in the direction of the sound, our flashlights frantically cutting through the darkness. The corridor was empty, silent. "Did you?" I started, my voice cracking. "It's the wind," Marcus said, but it was a reflexive dismissal, devoid of any conviction. Pipes, old building settling. "That was not the wind, man," I hissed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "That was a kid." He didn't answer. He just stood there, his knuckles white where he gripped his flashlight. The bravado was completely gone now, replaced by a raw, primal fear. We were no longer urban explorers. We were prey. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, you're right, let's go. Let's get the hell out of here." It was the most sensible thing he'd said all night. We turned, ready to bolt for the stairs, back to the safety of the warm, living world outside. And then, we heard it. It started from the far end of the corridor, the same direction the giggle had come from. Thump. A single, soft, wet sound. It was followed by a pause. Then another, thump. It was a heavy, rhythmic sound, a sound with weight behind it. Thump. Drag. A new element was added. A soft, scraping noise, like denim being dragged across a filthy floor. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. It was getting closer. "What the hell is that?" Marcus breathed, his face pale in the ambient gloom. My mind was screaming Kenji's story at me. A scraping. A dragging. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could only listen as the sound grew steadily louder, more defined. It was the sound of something moving, something propelling itself forward with a grotesque, uneven gait. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. It was coming down the hallway, towards us. Marcus, in a final, foolish act of defiance against the terror that was consuming us, raised his flashlight and pointed it down the hall. I aimed mine alongside his, our two beams converging into one brilliant, stark column of light. At the very end of the corridor, maybe 100 feet away, the light found her. It wasn't a full person. It was the torso and head of a girl. She looked to be in her late teens, with long, matted black hair that hung over her face, obscuring her features. She was wearing what might have once been a white nurse's uniform, now tattered and stained a filthy, mottled gray. She was propped up on her elbows. Below her waist there was nothing. It wasn't a clean surgical cut. It was a ragged, nightmarish void, a messy, dark absence. Her torso just ended, dragging behind her on the debris-strewn floor. That was the source of the sound. She was pulling herself forward with her arms, her torso dragging along the ground. Thump went an elbow hitting the concrete. Drag went her mutilated body. We were paralyzed, caught in a state of pure, unadulterated horror. My brain simply couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. It was a violation of the natural order, a walking, crawling nightmare made flesh. She stopped moving. She was in the center of our pooled light, a thing of absolute terror. Slowly, she lifted her head. The matted hair fell away from her face. Her face. God, her face. It was pale, like old parchment, but her eyes were just black holes, empty sockets that seemed to drink the light. Her mouth opened, a lipless slash in her deathly visage, and she spoke. The voice wasn't human. It was a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of dust and graves. It echoed in the dead air of the hallway, a question that drilled itself directly into my sanity. Watashi no ashi wa doko? Even with my limited Japanese, I knew. Kenji's words echoed in my head. Have you seen my legs? For a heartbeat, the world was silent and still. The girl, us, the dead hospital, a frozen tableau. Then Marcus screamed. It was not a manly roar or a battle cry. It was a high, piercing shriek of pure animal terror. The sound shattered the spell. The girl's head snapped towards us, the empty sockets fixed on us, and the apathetic, listless quality of her movement vanished. Her mouth opened wider into a silent, impossible scream. She threw herself forward, her elbows pumping like pistons. The sound changed from a slow, deliberate thump drag to a frantic, skittering scrabble, a sound of horrifying speed and desperate hunger. The noise of her ragged torso scraping on the floor became a loud, tearing rip. She was so fast, so impossibly, terrifyingly fast. We didn't think. We just ran. We turned and sprinted for the stairwell, our boots slipping on the slick floor. Panic was a physical thing, a hot acid that flooded my veins. Behind us, the scrabbling sound was getting closer, closer, a sound that will be burned into my auditory memory until the day I die. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The thought of seeing that thing gaining on us was more than my mind could handle. We hit the stairs, tumbling down them in a chaotic, uncontrolled fall. I caught a glimpse of Marcus's terrified face behind me. We scrambled to our feet on the ground floor and bolted for the shattered front doors, for the promise of outside, of life. The scrabbling sound was right behind us, echoing horribly in the concrete stairwell. It was coming down the stairs. We burst out of the hospital, back into the thick, humid Okinawan night. The air felt sacred, clean. We didn't stop. We ran across the overgrown grounds, back towards the collapsed section of the wall. I vaulted over the rubble, scraping my hands and knees, and didn't stop running until I reached the car. I fumbled for the handle, threw the door open, and dove inside. I looked back, expecting to see Marcus right behind me. He wasn't there. I looked towards the hospital. The gaping black entrance was empty, but I could still hear it. The frantic scraping was fainter now, but it was outside. It was on the grounds. "Marcus!" I screamed, my voice shredding my raw throat. Then I heard him. He screamed my name. "Alex, help me!" His voice was coming from the side of the building. He must have gone the wrong way in the panic. Another scream, this one choked off mid-syllable, replaced by a wet, tearing sound. Then, silence. The cicadas were still chirping, the city still hummed in the distance. The world outside the hospital walls was unchanged. But inside, my world had ended. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in the driver's seat of that beat-up Toyota, staring at the black maw of the hospital. It could have been seconds, or an eternity. Every instinct screamed at me to go back for him, to be a soldier, to be a friend. But the image of that thing and the sound of its impossible speed paralyzed me. The terror was a physical chain holding me in my seat. I did the most cowardly thing I have ever done in my life. I started the car. The engine roaring to life was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I slammed it into gear and tore away from that cursed place, leaving my friend behind in the darkness. I don't remember the drive back to Kaduna. It's a black hole in my memory. The next thing I knew, I was at the gate, the security forces kid looking at me with concern as I stared blankly ahead, shaking uncontrollably. The next few days were a blur of official procedures. I told them a story, a heavily edited, cowardly lie. I said Marcus and I had gone into Naha, we'd been drinking, we got into an argument, and he stormed off. I said I waited for him, then drove around looking for him, and finally came back to base, hoping he'd find his own way back. They launched a search. The Air Force, the Marines, the local police. I went with them, pointing out the general area where I'd last seen him. I couldn't bring myself to lead them to the hospital. I couldn't go back there. They never found him. Not a trace. No body, no clothing, no sign of a struggle. Marcus was officially declared AWOL, and then, months later, a deserter. His family was told a story of a young Marine who had abandoned his post, a lie to cover a truth that no one would ever believe. Chloe knew I was lying. She saw the raw terror in my eyes, a terror that went far beyond a simple bar fight. But she didn't push. She saw I was broken. Kenji knew too. When I finally saw him again at the ramen shop weeks later, he just looked at me with an infinite sorrowful pity. "You went there," he said. It wasn't a question. I could only nod, tears streaming down my face. "I am so sorry, Alex-san," he whispered. "Some warnings are written in blood." I was never the same. I was granted a compassionate reassignment back to the States a few months later. The official reason was psychological distress, PTSD, the base psychiatrist called it, but it wasn't the trauma of war. It was the trauma of a single night in a rotting building. I left Okinawa, but the hospital never left me. The girl with no legs crawls through my nightmares. I wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of that awful, frantic scraping echoing in my ears. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house is quiet, I think I hear it. A faint rhythmic sound from another room. Thump. Drag. I tell myself it's the house settling, the pipes, the wind, but I know what it is. I know she's still looking. And I live in constant, unyielding fear of the day she finally finds what she's been searching for. Because a small, dark part of my soul, the part that still lives in that cold, dark hallway, believes that Marcus wasn't her only target that night. He was just the one she caught. We were witnesses, and maybe, just maybe, she doesn't like to leave loose ends. So when people ask me about Okinawa, I tell them about the heat. It's easier than telling them about the cold. It's easier than explaining that I am a man who is haunted, not by a memory, but by a question whispered from a lipless mouth in a place where the dead do not rest. And I'm still waiting for the answer. Story: The Siren of Yanbaru. My name is Dr. Kenji Tanaka. I hold a PhD in marine bioacoustics from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. For 15 years, my life was the ocean. I charted the complex symphonies of humpback whales in the Maui Basin, deciphered the cryptic clicks of sperm whales in the Azores, and mapped the sonic health of coral reefs from the Caribbean to the Great Barrier Reef. I am a man of science, of data, of observable phenomena. I believe in what can be measured, recorded, and peer-reviewed. At least I used to. What I am about to recount is not something you will find in any scientific journal. My official report, the one that led to the quiet revocation of my research grant and my subsequent voluntary leave of absence from the academic world, cites equipment malfunction, nitrogen narcosis, and geological instability. It is a neat, untidy, and utterly false explanation for the events that transpired in the deep blue waters off the coast of Yanbaru, Okinawa. This is the truth, a truth that still echoes in the quietest hours of my night, a truth that has made me terrified of the very element I once called home. It began in the summer of 2019. I had secured a prestigious grant to study the bioacoustic recovery of the coral reefs in Yanbaru National Park. The area, a lush, semi-tropical wilderness on the northern tip of Okinawa Island, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a place of staggering beauty both above and below the water. My project was simple. Deploy a network of state-of-the-art hydrophones to create a sonic baseline of the reef's health. The soundscape of a healthy reef is a constant crackling chorus of snapping shrimp, fish grunts, and urchin scrapes. A dying reef, by contrast, is hauntingly silent. For the first 2 weeks, the project was textbook. I worked out of a small, rented bungalow in Kunigami Village, a sleepy town where the modern world felt like a distant rumor. My days were spent on a small research vessel, the Ryukyu Explorer, deploying and calibrating my equipment. The data that flowed back to my laptop was encouraging. The reef was alive, a vibrant orchestra of marine life. My local guide and boat captain was an old Okinawan fisherman named Higa-san. He was a man of at least 70, with skin like tanned leather and eyes that held the patient wisdom of the sea. He spoke little English, and my Japanese was functional at best, but we communicated through a shared respect for the ocean. He knew every current, every hidden cavern, every secret the sea held, or so I thought. The anomaly first appeared on the third Tuesday. It was just after 3 a.m. I was running a diagnostic on the hydrophone array from my bungalow when the new sound signature appeared on my spectrogram. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It wasn't the low-frequency moan of a baleen whale, or the high-frequency chatter of dolphins. It was a pure melodic tone, a series of harmonics that were mathematically perfect, almost synthetic, yet imbued with an organic, breathing quality. The frequency was centered around 800 Hz, but it modulated with breathtaking complexity, rising and falling in what could only be described as a song. It was hauntingly beautiful, a sound of profound loneliness and impossible grace. It lasted for precisely 3 minutes and 17 seconds, then vanished as cleanly as it had appeared. I spent the next 48 hours trying to identify it. I cross-referenced it with every known database of marine vocalizations. Cetaceans, pinnipeds, even the rarest of beaked whales, nothing. I ran it through filters to eliminate potential man-made sources. Naval sonar, submarine communication, distant shipping. The signature was too clean, too complex. It had the acoustic fingerprint of a biological entity, but one unknown to science. I showed the spectrogram to Higa-san the next morning. He squinted at the colorful display on my laptop, his face unreadable. I played the recording for him. The pure, ethereal melody filled the small cabin of the Ryukyu Explorer. A strange look passed over Higa-san's face, not of curiosity, but of something deeper, something akin to fear. He turned to me, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Abanai Tanaka-sensei," he said. "Dangerous." He pointed a gnarled finger to the northeast, towards a stretch of coastline marked by jagged black cliffs and deep churning water. "Ano basho kara." From that place? I checked the GPS logs from the hydrophones. The sound was triangulated to a location, approximately 2 kilometers offshore from Cape Hito, the northernmost point of the island, an area known for its treacherous currents and a deep underwater trench called the Yanbaru Deep. "Yes," I confirmed, "near the deep." Higa-san shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Old stories," he mumbled, switching to broken English. "Grandfather's story. Voice in the water. Kijimuna? No, not Kijimuna, something. Older. It sings for men. Men go, not come back." I offered a polite scientific smile. Every culture has its sea monsters and sirens. It was folklore, a charming but irrelevant distraction. "Probably a new species of whale, Higa-san. It's a major discovery." He didn't return my smile. "Whale does not sing for one man," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "It sings for the sea. This voice, it is singing for you." His words sent an unwelcome chill down my spine, a prickle of unease that I dismissed as romantic nonsense. But the obsession had taken root. I devoted every waking moment to capturing that sound again. I repositioned my most sensitive hydrophone, a custom-built cryogenic model worth more than my house, directly over the Yanbaru Deep. 3 nights later, it came again. This time it was different, longer, more intricate. The melody seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of my consciousness. I sat there in my bungalow, bathed in the glow of my screen, utterly mesmerized. It wasn't just a song. It was a narrative of sorrow, of ageless solitude. As I listened, a profound sense of melancholy washed over me. I felt an inexplicable urge to be closer to the source, to immerse myself in that sound, to answer its lonely call. The next morning, I announced my intention to dive the location. Higa-san flatly refused. "Current too strong," he said, his arms crossed. "Very deep, no good." "I'll pay you triple the daily rate," I offered. "No money," he said, shaking his head. "Life is more." His refusal only hardened my resolve. If he wouldn't take me, I would go myself. I was an experienced technical diver, certified for mixed gas deep dives. The next day, feigning a trip to Naha for supplies, I rented a small, powerful Zodiac boat and loaded it with my gear: twin rebreather tanks, a high-powered dive computer, an underwater scooter, and a portable acoustic locator. As I prepared to leave the dock, I was approached by 2 men. They were American, dressed in crisp civilian clothes that did nothing to hide their rigid military bearing. They flashed ID badges: U.S. Navy, Naval Intelligence. "Dr. Tanaka," the taller one asked. His name was Commander Thorne. His eyes were cold and gray, like a winter sea. "We understand you're conducting research in the area." "That's right," I said, my heart starting to pound. "Bioacoustics." "Your permit allows for research within the park boundaries," Thorne said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It does not, however, include the restricted training zone northeast of Cape Hito. That area is strictly off-limits, for your own safety, of course." The area he described was the exact location of the sound. "A training zone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What kind of training?" "That's classified," he said. "Just stay clear of it. We've had issues with civilian craft interfering with our operations. We wouldn't want any accidents." His smile was thin and sharp, a predator's grin. They left as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me with a profound sense of dread. This was no longer just a scientific mystery. The U.S. Navy was involved. They knew about the sound. My discovery wasn't a discovery at all. It was a secret they were trying to keep. That night, the song came again, but this time it was laced with something new. An undercurrent of invitation. It was no longer just a lament, it was a beckoning call. And through the complex harmonics, I could almost swear I heard a word, a whisper swimming in the ethereal melody, a word that sounded chillingly like my own name. Kenji. I slept poorly, my dreams filled with crushing pressure, and a beautiful, terrifying face just beyond my vision. I woke up with a singular, irrational conviction. I had to go. Under the cover of a moonless sky, I launched the Zodiac and sped towards the coordinates. The sea was black and choppy. The air was thick with salt and secrets. My acoustic locator pinged insistently, guiding me to the source. It was coming from deep, very deep, far below the reach of any recreational diver. I anchored the Zodiac, suited up, and rolled back into the inky black water. The silence of the rebreather was absolute. The only sound, the soft rasp of my own breathing. I switched on my headlamp, its beam cutting a fleeting tunnel through the infinite darkness. I kicked on the scooter and began my descent. 100 feet. The last of the ambient light vanished. I was in a world of pure black. 200 feet. The pressure began to build. A constant heavy hand pressing on my entire body. 300 feet. I was in the twilight zone, the realm of bioluminescent creatures that flickered in the periphery like stray ghosts. And then I heard it. Not through my equipment, but through the water. Through the bones of my skull. The song. It was all around me, a physical presence in the water, vibrating through my chest cavity. It was clearer, more powerful than any recording. It was intoxicating. A wave of euphoria washed over me. a dangerous, blissful calm that threatened to lull me into forgetting every safety protocol I had ever learned. My dive computer beeped a warning. I was descending too fast. I ignored it. The song was pulling me down, promising what? Knowledge? Peace? An end to loneliness? At 450 feet, my scooter's light grazed something that wasn't rock. It was metal. A twisted, corroded piece of wreckage, scarred with what looked like claw marks, deep gouges that had torn through a reinforced alloy. A few feet away, I found something else. A small, black box. Clearly a piece of advanced military hardware. A sensor of some kind. It was still active. A tiny red light blinking rhythmically. Thorne's training zone was a lie. This was a containment and observation post. The song intensified, wrapping around me like a shroud. It was coming from a massive dark opening in the seafloor trench ahead, the entrance to an underwater cave. The lure was overwhelming. My scientific curiosity had long been supplanted by a primal, lemming-like urge to see the singer. I guided the scooter into the mouth of the cave. The darkness within was absolute, a quality of black I had never experienced. It seemed to swallow my light beam. The song was deafening now, a symphony of longing and hunger that resonated deep in my soul. I felt my own will dissolving, replaced by the song's command. Come closer, see, be one with the sound. The cave opened into a vast chamber, so large my light couldn't find the walls. And in the center of that chamber, suspended in the crushing blackness, was the source. At first, I saw only a pale, human-like form. It was beautiful, ethereally so. Long black hair fanned out around it like a living corona of silk, undulating with the current. Its skin was the color of moonlight on mother of pearl. It had the torso of a woman, slender and graceful. My mind, steeped in myth, screamed siren. Then it turned to face me, and the illusion of beauty shattered into a million pieces of pure horror. Its eyes were not eyes. They were large, black, fathomless orbs, like polished obsidian, reflecting no light. They held a terrifying, ancient intelligence, and its mouth, dear God, its mouth. When it opened to sing, its jaw unhinged like a deep-sea predator, revealing rows of fine, needle-like teeth. The beautiful melodic song I had heard was not coming from a delicate voice box, but from the resonant chamber of its entire grotesque being. It was a lure, as perfect and as deadly as that of an anglerfish. Below the waist, it was not the tail of a fish. It was a writhing mass of long, powerful tentacles, like that of a colossal squid, which anchored it to the rocks below. And scattered around its anchor point, gleaming in my light, were the pathetic remnants of its prey. A rusted naval helmet, a diver's fin, and something that glinted with a dull, unmistakable shine. A human femur, picked clean. I was paralyzed, caught in the twin beams of its horrifying gaze and its hypnotic song. It had stopped singing its lament and was now producing a single, high-frequency tone that vibrated the water, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. It was a sound of inquiry, of assessment. It was tasting my mind, my fears, my memories. Suddenly, the water above erupted in a silent explosion of light. Several powerful searchlights stabbed down from the cave entrance, pinning the creature in their beams. My blood ran cold. Thorne. The Navy was here. The creature recoiled, its beautiful song turning into a shriek of pure sonic rage. It was a sound that tore at the water, a physical weapon. The reinforced glass on one of the Navy's remote searchlight drones shattered. The cave walls groaned under the acoustic assault. Small rocks began to rain down from the ceiling. I saw my chance. The spell was broken. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, cut through my daze. I jammed the throttle of my scooter and veered away, aiming for the entrance. The creature's shriek followed me, a sound of pure hatred. But it wasn't directed at me. It was for the lights, for its captors. I glanced back and saw a scene from a fever dream. Several small, unmanned submersibles were closing in, firing what looked like electrical nets. The creature thrashed, its tentacles tearing one of the drones apart as if it were a child's toy. Its rage-filled song was causing the entire cave structure to destabilize. The roof was collapsing. A massive boulder dislodged from above, crashing down between me and the cave mouth, missing me by inches. The shockwave sent me tumbling, ripping the scooter from my grasp. I was disoriented, spinning in the darkness, my headlamp flickering wildly. The song was now a chaotic cacophony of pain and fury. I knew in that moment that this creature wasn't just a monster the Navy had found. It was a prisoner. The hydrophones, the sensors, It was a cage I had inadvertently helped them locate. With my lungs burning and my mind screaming, I kicked frantically for the entrance, now a shrinking sliver of lesser darkness. The roar of collapsing rock was thunderous. The water was a thick soup of silt and debris. I clawed my way through the chaos, driven by the most primitive instinct, survival. I burst out of the cave just as the entrance collapsed behind me in a final, deafening implosion. The song was cut off, silenced. The sudden quiet was more terrifying than the noise. I ascended, my body screaming in protest, my mind a fractured mess. I didn't care about decompression sickness. I just had to get to the surface, to the air. As I broke through, gasping, I saw the source of the lights. It wasn't a surface ship. It was a black, sleek submarine, a Virginia-class attack sub, surfaced silently in the night. Men in black tactical gear were moving on its deck, recovering their damaged drones. My Zodiac was gone. They had taken it. A spotlight found me, pinning me in its glare. A voice hailed me over a loudspeaker, crisp and American. "Diver in the water. Do not resist. We are coming to collect you." I was pulled aboard, shivering, not from the cold, but from a terror so profound, it felt like it had permanently rewired my nervous system. Commander Thorne was there to greet me. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed. "You, doctor," he said, stripping the rebreather from my back, "are a bigger problem than our asset down there." My rescue was a debriefing that lasted for 2 days in a windowless room aboard the submarine. They took my equipment, my data, my logs. They told me what I saw. I saw an unstable geological formation. I experienced nitrogen narcosis, which led to vivid hallucinations. My equipment was faulty. The wreckage I saw was from an old World War II vessel. The song was a biohermetic resonance from a unique confluence of currents and cavern structures, a phenomenon they were studying. It was a perfectly crafted lie, impenetrable and absolute. I could either sign the official report and a dozen non-disclosure agreements, or I could face charges of espionage and endangering national security. I signed. They dropped me off in Naha 2 days later with a warning that my activities would be monitored for the rest of my life. My grant was terminated. My academic reputation was quietly and systematically dismantled with whispers of instability and professional misconduct. Higa-san, when I tried to find him to apologize, had apparently moved away to live with family on a different island. I suspect he was paid or threatened into silence. I now live in a small apartment in landlocked Phoenix, Arizona. I am as far from the ocean as I can get. I work as a data analyst for an insurance company. No one here knows about my past. To them, I am just a quiet, unremarkable man who sometimes stares at nothing for hours. But the science, the data, the things I believed in, they offer no comfort. Because some nights, when the city is quiet and the air conditioner hums at just the right frequency, I can still hear it. A faint, phantom echo in the bones of my skull. The song. I don't know if the creature is still alive, trapped in its collapsed prison. I don't know if the Navy succeeded in whatever their horrific goal was, but I know this. The universe is far older, far larger, and holds far darker things than our science can ever comprehend. And some of those things have voices, and they are always, always singing for someone to listen. The God's Eye. Forward. The following account has been pieced together from multiple sources. The fragmented journal of filmmaker Alex Vance, interviews with his former producer, and a translated testimony from his Okinawan guide. The events described took place on Kudaka Island, a place the locals call Shima no Kami, the island of the gods. To this day, the core footage Alex Vance shot remains lost, perhaps intentionally. Some believe it was destroyed. Others, those who know the island's whispers, say it never truly existed in our world at all. Part 1. The Siren's Call. Ambition is a hunger. For Alex Vance, it was a starvation. At 32, he was a documentary filmmaker with a portfolio of beautifully shot, critically acclaimed, and commercially invisible projects. He had a Vimeo page full of staff pics and a bank account full of cobwebs. He'd captured the haunting beauty of decaying Detroit theaters and the silent dignity of Alaskan fishermen, but his work lacked the one thing the market craved: a hook. A raw, visceral, undeniable hook. The email from Odyssey HD, a new aggressive streaming platform, was the lifeline he'd been praying for. They were funding a series called Forbidden Frontiers, focusing on places the world wasn't meant to see. They wanted grit. They wanted authenticity. They wanted risk. We've got a guy climbing active volcanoes in Vanuatu and a woman diving unregistered wrecks off the Horn of Africa. His new producer, a fast-talking man named Marcus, had said over a crackling video call, "What have you got for us, Vance? Show me something that makes the legal department sweat." Alex, desperate to impress, spent a week buried in a rabbit hole of obscure travelogues, anthropological texts, and conspiracy forums. He was looking for a place that wasn't just remote, but prohibited. And then he found it. A sliver of land in the East China Sea, part of the Okinawan archipelago. A place called Kudaka-jima. It wasn't the island's beauty that caught his eye, though the descriptions of crystalline waters and blindingly white coral sand were poetic. It was the rules, the prohibitions. Specifically, one phrase that appeared again and again in hushed, reverent tones. Filming is strictly forbidden at the sacred sites. This wasn't a no trespassing sign on a private estate. This was a deep cultural taboo, rooted in centuries of Ryukyuan spiritual belief. Kudaka was considered the landing point of Amamikyu, the creator goddess of the Ryukyu people. It was the genesis point. The island itself was a living temple, a kami. Its sacred groves, the utaki, were not for mortal eyes to capture, to frame, to possess. For Alex, this wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. Kudaka Island, he pitched to Marcus, his voice vibrating with a manic energy. Okinawa, they call it the island of the gods. It's the origin of their entire creation myth. And the holiest sites, the utaki, you can't film them. It's taboo. They believe the spirits of the gods still reside there, and to point a lens at them is the ultimate desecration. Marcus leaned into his camera, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Desecration. I like that. What happens if you do? That's the thing, Alex lied, improvising with the confidence of a seasoned con man. No one knows. The legends are vague. Curses, madness, vanishing. It's all conjecture. No one's ever been bold enough to actually do it and show the world. I'll be the first. He would be a ghost, a technological phantom. He had a new kit, micro cameras that looked like buttons, audio recorders the size of a thumbnail, a stabilized 4K rig that was small enough to fit in a day pack. He wouldn't be a film crew, he would be a lone pilgrim. A pilgrim with a secret, hungry eye. I'll frame it as a respectful journey, Alex explained, but the real story, the one for us, will be the covert footage from inside the forbidden zones. We'll capture the unseen. We'll film the face of God, or whatever they think is in there. Marcus grinned. The God's eye, I love it. You've got the green light, Vance, just don't get cursed. The insurance paperwork is a nightmare. The first inkling of dread, cold and sharp, should have come when Alex tried to hire a local guide. He sent out 24 emails. 20 went unanswered. 3 were terse, one-sentence refusals. The final reply came from a man named Kenji Tanaka. His English was perfect, his tone weary. Mr. Vance, the email read. Kudaka is a special place. It is not a tourist destination. It is a place for prayer and respect. If your intention is simply to experience its spirit, I can guide you. If you have other intentions, I must respectfully decline. The island, it knows. Alex replied with a carefully crafted lie, speaking of a personal spiritual journey and a desire to document the periphery of the island's culture, carefully avoiding the word film. Kenji reluctantly agreed to meet him in Naha, Okinawa's capital. Standing outside the ferry terminal a week later, Alex felt the oppressive Okinawan humidity clinging to him like a second skin. Kenji was older than he'd expected. A man in his late 50s, with a deeply tanned, wrinkled face and eyes that seemed to hold the placid depth of the ocean itself. He didn't shake Alex's hand, offering a simple, deep bow instead. You travel light, Kenji observed, eyeing Alex's single, deceptively heavy backpack. I believe in a small footprint, Alex said, the lie tasting sour in his mouth. Inside that pack, nestled among clothes and water bottles, was over $30,000 worth of surveillance-grade recording equipment. As they boarded the small, high-speed ferry to Kudaka, Kenji spoke, his voice barely a whisper above the engine's roar. "There are 2 islands, Mr. Vance. The one you can see with your eyes, the beaches, the roads, the houses, and the one you must feel with your heart. The second island is older and more powerful. It has rules. You must not take anything from the island. No stone, no shell, no grain of sand, and you must not record video or photographs in the sacred places. This is not a request, it is a law of the spirit." He looked directly at Alex, his gaze unwavering. "The kami are not for entertainment. They are not a story. They are a presence. To try and capture them is to try and bottle the wind. It will only break the bottle and cut your hands." Alex nodded, performing his role of the respectful tourist. "I understand completely." But as the ferry cut through the turquoise water and the long flat silhouette of Kudaka Island rose from the horizon, he felt a shiver of profane excitement. He wasn't there to bottle the wind. He was there to point a camera at it and see what would happen when it stared back. Part 2. The Unblinking Lens. The silence was the first thing Alex noticed. It wasn't the absence of sound. The ever-present hum of cicadas was a constant shimmering wall of noise, and the gentle lapping of waves on the shore was a soothing rhythm. It was a different kind of silence. A heavy, expectant quiet that seemed to absorb sound. The air felt thick, ancient, charged with an energy he couldn't name. They rented bicycles, the island's primary mode of transport, and Kenji began the tour. He showed Alex the small, quiet village, the coral stone walls weathered by salt and time, the locals who offered serene nods but whose eyes lingered on him, the outsider. Kenji spoke of the island's history, of the Izaiho festival that hadn't been held in decades due to a lack of women to become priestesses, of the sea snakes and the sacred wells. Alex feigned interest, but his mind was a whirring calculator of angles and opportunities. His shirt, a plain black polo, had a camera lens no bigger than the head of a pin sewn into the placket. He kept his hand near his chest, subtly adjusting the aim, his thumb periodically pressing the nearly silent activation button on the recorder in his pocket. He was already breaking the rule, stealing fleeting, furtive images of the village, the coastline, Kenji's own earnest face. Establishing shots, he told himself, nothing sacred yet. That afternoon, Kenji led him to the island's most famous sacred site, Fubo Yutaki. It wasn't a building. It was a dense grove of trees, a depression in the earth that was fenced off by a simple rope barrier and a small, weathered wooden sign. "This is the womb of the goddess," Kenji said, his voice dropping to a reverential hush. "The origin. The most sacred place. We do not enter. We do not even point. We simply stand here and offer our respect." Alex stood at the barrier, gazing into the impenetrable green darkness. The air flowing out of the grove was noticeably cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Something faintly floral and cloying like funeral incense. The cicadas, so loud just moments before, were completely silent in this one spot. The world seemed to be holding its breath. He felt a primal urge to see what was inside, to push past the rope and enter the forbidden green. It was a physical pull, a deep, unsettling curiosity that was more powerful than any he had ever felt. "What's in there?" Alex asked, his voice sounding thin. "Presents," Kenji said simply. "Not for us to see." He turned away. "Come, there are other places." As they cycled away, Alex glanced back. For a split second, in the deep shadows of the grove, he thought he saw a flicker of white. A garment? A face? It was gone before his brain could process it. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the image was seared into his mind. That night, in his small room at the island's only minshuku or guest house, Alex committed his first true act of digital sacrilege. He unpacked his gear. With the curtains drawn and the door locked, he downloaded the day's secret footage. The playback was unsettling. The video was clear, but the audio was corrupt. Beneath the sounds of the wind and Kenji's voice was a low, persistent static, a rhythmic hiss that wasn't on any of his other recordings. He ran it through a filter, isolating the frequency. It sounded disturbingly like whispering. Hundreds of overlapping sibilant whispers, just on the edge of intelligibility. He cranked the volume, leaning close to his laptop speakers, trying to decipher a single word. The sound made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was inhuman, like snakes rustling through dry leaves. Then, his laptop screen flickered and died. Not the gentle fade of a software crash, but an abrupt, violent shutoff, as if the power cord had been ripped from the wall. He tried to reboot it, nothing. It was completely dead. A brand new top-of-the-line machine, now a useless brick of metal and plastic. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Coincidence. It had to be a power surge, a faulty motherboard. But the whispers. He spent the rest of the night in a state of high alert, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the island. The creak of the old wooden building, the scuttling of some small creature in the walls, the distant moan of a fairy horn. Every shadow seemed to shift and writhe. He felt watched. The feeling was so intense, so palpable, that he got up twice to check the lock on his door and peer through the crack in the curtains. There was nothing but the moonlit coral path and the swaying of sea grape trees. The next day, Alex was visibly on edge. Kenji noticed. "You did not sleep well," he stated, not asked. "Just not used to the quiet," Alex lied. They visited the northern part of the island, a place called Kaberu. It was a beach where Amamikyu was said to have first set foot. A small stone marker stood near the shore. As Kenji explained the mythology, Alex's gaze was drawn to a series of small caves carved into the limestone cliff face. "What are those?" he asked. "Tombs," Kenji said. "Old burial sites. We do not go near them. They are places of rest." This was it, a place that was sacred, but not as heavily monitored as Fubo Utaki. The hunger for a real, substantial shot, a piece of footage no one else had, overrode his burgeoning fear. "I need a moment," Alex said, feigning a sudden stomach cramp. "The seafood last night, maybe." Kenji looked at him with an expression of deep, sorrowful pity. "Be careful where you walk, Mr. Vance. The ground here remembers every footstep." As soon as Kenji was out of sight, Alex scrambled towards the cliffs. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. He pulled out his small, professional-grade 4K camera, the main one, and switched it on. The red recording light felt like a malevolent eye staring back at him. He chose the largest of the cave openings and ducked inside. The air was instantly cold and stale, thick with the smell of saltpeter and something else. A dry, dusty odor of immense age. The cave was shallow, barely a large alcove. Inside, resting on a stone shelf, were several large ceramic urns, funerary urns. He raised the camera, his hands trembling slightly. The lens swept across the ancient pottery, the rough-hewn stone walls, the deep darkness at the back of the cave. He was doing it. He was capturing the forbidden. A surge of triumph coursed through him. That's when he heard the sound. It came from the urn directly in front of him. A soft, distinct scrape. The sound of ceramic grinding on stone. Alex froze, camera still pointed forward. His breath hitched in his throat. He told himself it was a pebble, dislodged by a vibration, an animal. But the silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. He took a hesitant step closer, peering at the urn. The lid, a heavy-looking piece of fired clay, had moved. It was shifted just a centimeter to the side, revealing a sliver of perfect black emptiness within. He was certain it had been perfectly sealed a moment ago. A child's giggle echoed from the mouth of the cave behind him. Alex spun around so fast he nearly dropped the camera. There was no one there. Just the blindingly bright beach and the shimmering turquoise sea. The sound had been crystal clear, impossibly close. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He fumbled with the camera, switching it off and shoving it into his pack. He scrambled out of the cave, not looking back, his boots slipping on the loose scree. He ran. He didn't stop running until he found Kenji, who was waiting for him patiently by the bicycles, his expression unreadable. "Are you finished?" Kenji asked, his voice flat. Alex could only nod, panting, his mind screaming. That night, the terror returned, magnified. He didn't dare try to view the new footage. His primary camera now sat in his bag like a venomous snake, dormant but deadly. He lay in the dark, and the whispers came back, no longer needing a machine to be heard. They were in the room with him, a chorus of dry, rustling voices slithering just at the edge of his hearing. He squeezed his eyes shut and saw the cave, the urn, the shifted lid. He heard the giggle. He began to understand. The island wasn't just sacred, it was sentient, and it knew he was a thief. Part 3. The Descent. Sleep offered no escape. It offered only nightmares, vivid and suffocating. He dreamt he was back in the burial cave, but it was no longer empty. The urns were open. and inside them were not bones, but wads of long black human hair, twisting and writhing like nests of snakes. A small girl in a white kimono stood in the corner, her back to him. When she turned around, her face was a smooth, blank canvas of skin, devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth. She raised a hand and pointed at him, and from her featureless face came the sound of 1,000 angry whispers. He woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, the sound of his own terror echoing in the small room. The third day was his last on the island. Kenji seemed to have withdrawn into himself. The gentle guide was gone, replaced by a solemn warden. He spoke only when necessary, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape as if watching for a storm. Alex was a wreck. He hadn't slept, he couldn't eat. A paranoid fear gnawed at him. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow, every quiet glance from a local felt like a direct, personal threat. The island was closing in. He knew he should leave. Take the first ferry back, throw his cameras into the ocean, and never speak of this place again. But the ambition, the ravenous hunger that had brought him here, was still there, twisted now into a desperate need for justification. He couldn't leave with nothing but corrupted audio, a dead laptop, and a psyche that was beginning to fracture. He needed the shot, the one that would make it all worthwhile.
He had to go back to Fubo Utaki. He planned his move with the cunning of a cornered animal. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows, he told Kenji he wanted to spend his last few hours sitting alone by the shore to reflect. Kenji looked at him for a long time, his face a mask of profound sadness. "The sun is setting, Mr. Vance. Bad things come out in the twilight. The old ones call it Omaga Doki, the hour of meeting demons. It is not a time to be alone." "I'll be fine," Alex insisted, his voice brittle. "I won't go far." Kenji nodded slowly. "There is a ferry at 5:30, the last one. If you are not on it, the island will keep you for the night." He paused, his gaze boring into Alex. "Some who stay the night are never the same. The island shows them things." Alex left him and cycled away, not towards the beach, but inland, towards the island's humming, silent heart, towards the forbidden grove. He found the simple rope barrier just as the sky began to bleed into shades of orange and violet. The air was still, heavy, and cold. The silence was absolute. No cicadas, no birds, nothing. He pulled the main camera from his pack. Its metal body was strangely cold to the touch, almost icy. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the controls. Just one shot, he told himself. His mantra against the rising tide of fear. A pan of the entrance. That's it. Then I'm gone. He stepped over the rope. The moment his foot touched the ground on the other side, the world changed. It was as if he'd passed through an invisible membrane. The air became thick, difficult to breathe, saturated with that cloying, sweet smell of incense and rot. The light from the setting sun seemed to bend and warp, unable to penetrate the dense canopy above. The sounds of the outside world, the distant ocean, the wind, vanished completely. He was in a bubble of profound, unnatural silence. He raised the camera, heart pounding a deafening rhythm in his ears. He pointed the lens into the deep, verdant blackness of the grove. What he saw through the viewfinder was not what he saw with his naked eye. With his own eyes, he saw trees, leaves, and shadows. But through the camera's electronic eye, the world was different. The air shimmered, distorted, as if he were looking through a heat haze. And in the haze, there were shapes, faint, translucent figures drifting slowly between the trees. They were vaguely human in form, but they moved with a slow, boneless grace that was deeply wrong. They had no faces, just blurred ovals of shimmering light. Alex's blood ran cold. He lowered the camera, blinking. The figures were gone. He raised it again. They were there, closer this time. Their blank faces turned towards the lens. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't his imagination. The camera was seeing something that he couldn't. The god's eye was open, and it was looking into another world, a world that was not meant for him. A sound broke the silence, a low, guttural chant coming from the heart of the grove. It was a chorus of voices, male and female, ancient and cracked with age. It was a sound of immense sorrow and equally immense power. He should have run, but he was paralyzed, held captive by a horrifying symbiosis with his camera. He was the eye, and it was the brain, processing a reality he couldn't comprehend. He took a step forward, then another, drawn deeper into the grove by the hypnotic chant. The ground grew soft and spongy under his feet. The trees were twisted into unnatural shapes, their branches like gnarled, reaching arms. The translucent figures were all around him now, visible even without the camera. They were a silent, ghostly procession, ignoring him, all moving towards the source of the chanting. He broke through into a small clearing, and he saw it. It wasn't a demon, it wasn't a monster, it was worse. In the center of the clearing was a large, flat stone. On the stone lay a figure, draped in white. Standing around it were a dozen figures, but these were not ghosts. They were solid. They wore ancient, ceremonial robes, and their faces were covered with white masks, just like the one in his dream. Blank, smooth, featureless. They were the source of the chanting. One of them turned its masked head slowly, impossibly, to look directly at him. The chanting stopped. The silence that fell was a physical blow. It was the silence of a vacuum, the silence of the void. All the figures, ghost and solid alike, turned to face him, and the figure on the stone sat up. It turned its head, and Alex saw that it too wore a white, featureless mask. It raised a hand, pointing a long, pale finger directly at him, directly at the camera lens. From behind the mask came a sound. It wasn't a whisper, it wasn't a scream. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated static. A blast of white noise so loud and so violent that it felt like a physical spike being driven into his brain. The camera in his hands died. The view screen went black. The red light winked out. And then every figure in the clearing opened its mouth, a mouth that hadn't been there a second before, a perfectly round, black hole in the center of their blank faces, and joined the shriek. The sound shattered his sanity. It was the sound of everything and nothing, the sound of creation and destruction. Alex dropped the camera. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the noise was inside him, vibrating in his bones, tearing his thoughts to shreds. He turned and ran, blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, the terrible, world-ending shriek pursuing him, surrounding him, consuming him. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, and the world dissolved into a screaming, merciful blackness. Part 4. The Echo. Kenji Tanaka found him at dawn. He had missed the last ferry. When Alex hadn't appeared, Kenji had known. He hadn't searched during the night. No islander would be foolish enough to enter the woods after dark, especially not for a man who had courted disaster. He had waited and prayed. He found Alex Vance curled in a fetal position at the edge of the Fubo Utaki, just outside the rope barrier. His clothes were torn, his skin was crisscrossed with scratches, but he was physically unharmed. His eyes, however, were wide open, staring at nothing. A thin line of drool trickled from the corner of his mouth. He was catatonic, his mind scrubbed clean by a terror it could not process. His expensive camera lay on the ground a few feet away, its lens shattered, looking like a single, milky, blind eye. Getting Alex off the island was a quiet, solemn affair. Kenji enlisted the help of 2 other men. They carried the unresponsive filmmaker to the first ferry of the morning, his backpack slung over Kenji's own shoulder. The few other passengers, locals, averted their eyes. They knew. They didn't need to ask what had happened. They could see the shadow of the island clinging to him. Back in the US, Marcus, the producer, grew impatient. His emails and calls to Alex went unanswered. Finally, a call came. Not from Alex.
but from a hospital in Virginia, near Alex's parents' home. The diagnosis was acute psychosis with severe post-traumatic stress. He was nonverbal, prone to fits of screaming terror if he was shown a screen of any kind, a television, a phone, a computer. The hospital had his belongings. Marcus, citing his company's ownership of the project and its assets, had Alex's backpack shipped to his office in Los Angeles. It arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus opened it with a mix of morbid curiosity and professional obligation. Inside, he found the dead laptop, the small button camera, and a main 4K camera with its shattered lens. The memory cards were all there. This was the prize. This was the footage. He slotted the first card from the button camera into his high-end editing suite. Most of the files were corrupted, unreadable, but he managed to salvage a few clips. He saw the village, Kenji's face, the coastline. Then he found the audio track, the one Alex had mentioned, the one with the whispers. He put on his studio headphones and listened. The hissing was there, a bed of static. But with the studio's powerful filters, Marcus could isolate it further. It wasn't just whispering, it was language. A fast, fluid, clicking language that sounded like no human tongue he had ever heard. Listening to it for more than a few seconds made him feel dizzy and nauseous. Then he moved to the main card, the one from the broken camera, the one from inside the burial cave and the sacred grove. It took his tech team 3 days to recover anything. The data was fractured, almost completely destroyed. They said it looked like it had been hit with a massive electromagnetic pulse, but one that had somehow targeted only the recorded data, leaving the rest of the card intact. They managed to restore 2 fragments. The first was a 10-second video clip. The timestamp corresponded to the afternoon of the second day. It was the footage from the burial cave. The image was stable, clear 4K. It showed the inside of the cave, the stone shelf, the funerary urns. Then, the urn in the center of the frame shuddered. The lid scraped sideways. A wisp of something black, like smoke or ink in water, curled out of the opening before the clip abruptly ended. The second fragment was audio only, just 3 seconds. The timestamp was from late afternoon on the third day, the time Alex was in Fubo Utaki. Marcus put on his headphones again, his heart thudding. He pressed play. He heard the shriek. It wasn't just static. It was layered, complex, and utterly alien. It was a chord of pure psychic agony. It bypassed his ears and slammed directly into his brainstem. He ripped the headphones off, his ears ringing, a wave of vertigo washing over him. He felt a sudden, inexplicable terror, a primal fear that a predator was in the room with him. He spun around in his chair. The editing bay was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. He sat there for a long time, staring at the audio file on his screen, his breathing shallow. He thought of Alex Vance, staring at nothing in a hospital room a continent away. He thought of the guide's warning, the island shows them things. He understood then. The footage wasn't a product, it was a contagion, a fragment of a reality that infects and destroys whatever observes it. Alex had pointed a lens at God, or a demon, or something in between, and the thing had looked back. And in looking back, it had burned itself onto the memory card, a virulent echo waiting for the next person to press play. With a shaking hand, Marcus dragged the recovered files, the whispers, the moving urn lid, the 3-second shriek, into the digital trash bin. Then he selected Secure Erase. He watched the progress bar fill, holding his breath until it was complete. He removed the memory cards from the reader, walked them over to his office shredder, and pulverized them into glittering dust. He canceled the Forbidden Frontiers project the next day, citing insurmountable technical and logistical failures. He never tried to contact Alex Vance or his family again. But sometimes late at night, when the office is quiet and he's the only one left, he can still hear it. A faint, dry hissing just at the edge of his hearing, the sound of whispers. He has never told anyone what he saw and heard on those files. Some things, he has learned, are not meant to be captured. Some places are not meant to be seen, and some silences, once broken, can never be restored. The God's eye sees all, and it never, ever blinks.
Story: The Child of Yanbaru. They say memory is a funny thing. It's not a perfect recording. It's a story we tell ourselves, edited and revised with every telling. But some memories aren't like that. Some are burned into you, branded on your soul like a cattle mark. They don't fade. They don't change. They just are. They sit in the dark corner of your mind, waiting for a quiet moment to crawl out and remind you that the world is older, deeper, and far more terrifying than you can possibly imagine. My story, our story, is one of those memories. It started with the sun on our faces and the promise of adventure. It ended in shadow. There were 4 of us back then, fresh out of college and stationed at Kadena Air Base. We were young, dumb, and convinced of our own immortality. Okinawa was our playground. We'd spent weekends exploring the pristine beaches of the South, diving in the Karama Islands, and losing ourselves in the neon-drenched streets of Naha. But we grew tired of the tourist trails. We craved something authentic, something raw. Ryota was our unofficial leader. He was half Japanese, half American, and possessed a cocksure swagger that both drew people in and occasionally set your teeth on edge. He spoke fluent Japanese and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never truly faced failure. It was his idea to tackle the Yanbaru. The Yanbaru is the vast, subtropical rainforest that blankets the northern third of Okinawa. It's a place of breathtaking beauty, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a remnant of the ancient world. But it's also a place with a different reputation among the old Okinawans. They speak of it with a reverence that borders on fear. It's a place of spirits, of Kijimuna playing tricks in the banyan trees, and of darker things left behind by the island's tumultuous history. The Battle of Okinawa raged through these forests, and some say the sorrow and violence of that time soaked into the very soil, nurturing a particular kind of despair that lingers to this day. Hiroshi, whose grandmother was a Yuta, an Okinawan shaman, was our voice of caution. He was quieter than the rest of us, more spiritual. He'd grown up with the stories, the warnings whispered over tea about not disturbing the old places. The woods remember Kenji, he told me once, his eyes serious. You have to show respect. You don't take things. You don't even leave your own trash. You pass through as a ghost. Then there was Daiki, the easygoing one. He was just along for the ride, a loyal friend who mediated the friction between Ryota's bravado and Hiroshi's caution. And me? My name is Kenji. I was the observer, the one with the camera, always trying to capture the moment. I thought I was documenting an adventure. I had no idea I was chronicling a descent. Ryota had found a map online, a faded, hand-drawn thing, posted on some obscure hiking forum. It detailed a supposedly abandoned trail, a pre-war footpath that cut deep into the heart of the Yanbaru, far from any designated park routes. The post mentioned a landmark, a small, solitary wooden cabin, supposedly used by woodcutters before the war. A real expedition, guys, Ryota had declared, slapping the printout on our kitchen table. No tourists, no signs, just us and the wild. Hiroshi traced the thin line on the map with his finger, his brow furrowed. This area. My Oba-chan told me to stay away from here. She said families went into the woods to escape the fighting. Some never came out. Come on, Hiro, Ryota scoffed, rolling his eyes. That was 80 years ago. It's just history. Besides, ghost stories are just that, stories. It'll be an adventure. Against Hiroshi's better judgment, and fueled by Ryota's infectious enthusiasm, we agreed. We spent a week gathering supplies, high-end trekking gear, water purifiers, freeze-dried meals, first aid kits. We were prepared for anything the physical world could throw at us. We were utterly unprepared for what was waiting in the silence. We set off on a Friday morning in late autumn. The air was thick, with the promise of rain, the sky a bruised purple-gray. We parked our beat-up van on a dirt turnout off Route 58, the main artery snaking up the island's west coast. The The moment we stepped out of the car, the atmosphere changed. The roar of the ocean faded, replaced by the deafening, electric hum of cicadas. The air grew heavy, humid, and smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something vaguely sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit. The trailhead was barely an indentation in the dense wall of green. Ryota, machete in hand, hacked at the hanging vines with a triumphant grin. Here we go, the point of no return. Hiroshi muttered a quiet prayer under his breath, touching a small omamori charm that hung from his neck. I felt a prickle of unease myself, but I raised my camera, framing Ryota in the viewfinder, a pioneer on the edge of a dark continent. The first photo I took that day was overexposed, a strange white flare obscuring half the image, as if the forest itself was recoiling from the flash. The first few hours were grueling but exhilarating. The forest was a cathedral of green, sunlight struggling to pierce the dense canopy in shimmering, hazy shafts. Enormous, prehistoric-looking ferns grew in abundance, and the gnarled roots of ancient banyan trees snaked across the path like arthritic fingers. The sounds were overwhelming. The chirps and clicks of unseen insects, the rustle of lizards in the undergrowth, the distant call of an Okinawa rail. But as we pushed deeper, the character of the woods began to shift. The vibrant sounds of life started to recede, replaced by an unnerving quiet. The air grew still and cool, despite the humidity. The path, which had been faintly discernible, seemed to vanish and reappear, as if it were playing tricks on us. More than once, we found ourselves circling back to a familiar-looking cluster of moss-covered rocks. "This is weird," Daiki said, wiping sweat from his brow. "It feels like we're walking in place." Ryota, ever the pragmatist, consulted his compass and GPS. "We're on track. It's just dense in here. The canopy is messing with the signal." But I felt it too, a strange sense of dislocation of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my lens sweeping the impenetrable shadows between the trees. I saw nothing, but the feeling persisted, a cold spot on the back of my neck, the kind of primal instinct that tells you a predator is near. Hiroshi was walking with his head down, his knuckles white where he gripped his pack straps. He hadn't said a word in over an hour. It was late afternoon when we found it. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. The sky opened up and a torrential downpour began, turning the forest floor into a muddy torrent. The rain was cold, and within minutes we were soaked to the bone. We were looking for a rock outcropping, anything to provide shelter, when Daiki pointed. "Hey, what's that?" Through a curtain of rain and mist we saw it, a dark rectangular shape almost completely swallowed by the vegetation. The cabin. It was smaller than I'd imagined and in a far worse state of decay. The wood was blackened with age and rot, covered in a slick carpet of moss. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and where a window once was, there was now just a dark, gaping hole. A single wooden door, warped and swollen, hung crookedly on one rusted hinge. It looked less like a shelter and more like a tomb. "Told you it was here?" Ryota shouted over the roar of the rain, a triumphant look on his face. "Come on, let's get out of this." He pushed his way through the overgrown brush and shoved the door. It resisted with a groan of tortured wood, then swung inward into blackness. A wave of air washed over us, and it was the most repellent thing I have ever smelled. It was a thick, musty stench of rot and stagnant water, but underneath it was that same sickly sweet smell from the forest's edge, now amplified, concentrated. It was the smell of something left to spoil for a very, very long time. Hiroshi stopped dead in his tracks. "No," he said, his voice low and firm. "We don't go in there." "What are you talking about?" Ryota shot back, exasperated. "It's pouring. We'll be sick by morning if we stay out here." "This place is wrong, Ryo. Can't you feel it?" Hiroshi's gaze was fixed on the dark doorway. "It's heavy. This is not a good place." "Don't be so superstitious," Ryota snapped, already stepping across the threshold. "It's just an old, rotten shack." Daiki and I exchanged a nervous glance. The thought of spending the night in the relentless cold rain was miserable, but the aura of dread emanating from the cabin was palpable. Still, we were followers. We followed Ryota inside. Hiroshi hesitated for a long moment. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he followed us, pulling the omamori charm out from under his shirt and holding it tightly in his fist. The interior was a single small room. The darkness was absolute. Ryota fumbled with his headlamp, and when the beam cut through the gloom, we all flinched. The light illuminated a scene of profound desolation. A simple wooden table and a single chair lay overturned in one corner, covered in a thick layer of grime and cobwebs. A rusted wood-burning stove stood against the far wall, its stovepipe having long ago collapsed. The floor was littered with damp, mulched leaves that had blown in through the broken window. But it was the other side of the room that drew our attention.
There, a small, straw-filled mattress lay on the floor, rotted through and spilling its contents like a disemboweled animal. Above it, tacked to the wall, were several childlike drawings on yellowed, brittle paper. They were drawn in charcoal, simple stick figures of a man and a woman, and a much smaller stick figure, a child, standing beside a house. In one drawing, the child was alone, and dark, frantic scribbles rained down from the top of the page. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a woodcutter's hut. This was a home. Or it had been. See, just an old family place, Ryota said, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. The air in the cabin was frigid, a damp cold that had nothing to do with the rain outside, and everything to do with the oppressive stillness within. It felt like walking into a freezer. I raised my camera, trying to distance myself from the feeling by putting a lens between me and it. I snapped a photo of the drawings. The flash was blindingly bright in the small space. When I looked at the camera's display, the image was corrupted. A thick, black bar ran diagonally across the screen, obscuring the drawings entirely. I tried again. Same result. "Stay close to the door," Hiroshi whispered, his eyes darting around the shadows that danced at the edge of our headlamp beams. "Don't touch anything." Of course, Ryota didn't listen. He was drawn to the corner with the mattress. He kicked at a small pile of debris near the floor, uncovering something. He bent down and picked it up. "Hey, check this out," he said, holding it up in the light. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It was no bigger than the palm of his hand, worn smooth with time and handling. Its form was simple, almost abstract, but it was unmistakably a bird. It was the kind of thing a child would treasure, a small, secret friend. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. I could almost picture it, a small child trapped in this dark, damp cabin, whittling this little bird for comfort while the world outside fell apart. "Put it back, Ryota," Hiroshi said, his voice shaking with a sudden, desperate urgency. "Now." "Relax," Ryota said, turning the bird over in his hand. "It's just a piece of old wood. It's kinda cool, a souvenir from our epic trip." "It is not a souvenir," Hiroshi's voice rose, cracking. "It belongs to this place. It belongs to whoever was here. You don't understand. Things can have attachments. Spirits can get attached to things they loved." "Oh, here we go with the ghost stories again," Ryota sneered, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. He looked from the bird to Hiroshi's pale, terrified face. For a moment, I thought he would listen, but his pride won out. With a defiant shrug, he slipped the wooden bird into the pocket of his rain jacket. "It's a keepsake. End of story." The moment he did, the room plunged into absolute blackness. All three of our headlamps died simultaneously. Panic erupted. Daiki yelped. I fumbled for my pack, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cold in the room intensified, becoming a physical pressure. And then we heard it. From the corner where the mattress lay, there came a sound. It was the soft, almost inaudible sound of a child humming a simple, tuneless melody. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated innocence, and in that suffocating darkness, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. Ryota screamed, a raw, guttural cry of pure fear. He scrambled backward, crashing into the overturned table. The humming stopped. An eternity passed in the black silence. Then, my headlamp flickered back on. Then Daiki's. Then Ryota's. We were all looking at the corner. There was nothing there. Just the rotted mattress and the drawings on the wall. Without another word, we fled. We scrambled out of that cabin, back into the driving rain, not caring about the storm, the mud, or the dark. We ran blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces. We didn't stop until the cabin was lost to the trees in the mist, until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We made a cold, miserable camp a mile away, huddled under a makeshift tarp. No one spoke of what happened. We didn't need to. The shared terror was a living thing between us. Ryota was unnaturally quiet, sitting with his arms wrapped around his knees, staring into the darkness. I saw him, more than once, reach into his jacket pocket and touch the object within, his expression a mixture of fear and a strange, possessive fascination. The rain finally stopped just before dawn, and we packed up and hiked out in grim silence, following the rising sun. The forest felt different on the way out, lighter, as if it had expelled us, as if it had let us go. All but one of us. The first week back was deceptively normal. We fell back into our routines, the horror of the cabin seeming more like a collective nightmare in the bright, rational light of day. We laughed about how spooked we'd been. Ryota even brought out the wooden bird and set it on his bookshelf, a trophy of his supposed bravery. "See, just an old piece of wood," he'd say with a forced laugh.
But things were not normal. Not for Ryota. It started subtly. He complained of not being able to sleep. He'd have vivid nightmares, he said, but he can never remember them. Only the feeling of suffocating dread they left behind. He started looking tired, gaunt. Dark circles formed under his eyes. Then, he began misplacing things. His keys, his wallet, his phone. He'd tear his apartment apart, looking for them, only to find them in obvious places he'd already checked a dozen times. One day, he called me in a panic. He'd lost the wooden bird. He'd searched everywhere. I went over to help him look. We spent an hour searching his small apartment. Finally, I found it. It was sitting in the middle of his pillow. I never put it there, he whispered, his face ashen. I swear, Kenji, I never put it there. The incidents grew stranger, more personal. He started hearing noises in his apartment at night. Soft footsteps, the sound of something being dragged across the wooden floor. He'd call us in the middle of the night, convinced someone was in his home. We'd go over, find nothing, and leave him sitting on his couch, trembling. One evening, we were all at his place watching a movie. Ryota got up to get a beer. As he passed the hallway, he froze. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice tight. "Hear what?" Daiki said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Humming," Ryota said, like a kid humming. We all went silent. We listened. There was nothing but the sound of the movie. "Dude, you're freaking yourself out," Daiki said. But Ryota was pale. He wouldn't let it go. He insisted he heard it. The change in him was alarming. The cocksure, confident leader we knew was disappearing, replaced by a paranoid, frightened shell of a man. He lost weight. His skin took on a waxy, unhealthy pallor. Hiroshi was the first to say what we were all secretly thinking. He cornered me and Daiki one afternoon. "It's the bird," he said, his voice low and intense. "He never should have taken it. The child's spirit. It's attached to it. It followed him." "What are we supposed to do?" I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. "He has to take it back," Hiroshi said simply. "It's the only way. He has to return it to the cabin and ask for forgiveness." We tried to talk to Ryota. It was a disaster. He became defensive, angry. "You think I'm crazy?" he yelled, his eyes wild. "You think I'm being haunted by some ghost kid because of a stupid piece of wood? It's stress. That's all it is." But even as he yelled, his eyes kept darting towards the bookshelf, where the bird sat, as if he expected it to move. His denial was fierce, because the fear was real. He was trapped between his rational mind and the terrifying reality of his experience. The breaking point came about a month after our trip. I got a call from Ryota's neighbor. She was frantic. She'd heard a huge crash from his apartment, followed by screaming. She'd called the police. Daiki, Hiroshi, and I rushed over. We arrived just as the base security police were forcing the door. The scene inside was chaos. His apartment was destroyed. The TV was smashed. Chairs were overturned. And in the middle of the living room stood Ryota, holding a shattered lamp base, his knuckles bloody. His eyes were wide with a terror I have never seen before or since. "She was here," he screamed when he saw us. "She was right here, standing in the corner humming that song. She was just watching me." He was sobbing now, incoherent. "I just want her to leave me alone. I just want her to go away." The police took him to the base hospital for psychiatric evaluation. They put him on sedatives. Hiroshi and I went into the wrecked apartment to clean up. As I was picking up broken glass, I saw it. Lying unscathed in the middle of all the destruction, right in the center of the room, was the small wooden bird. I stared at it, and a cold, terrible understanding settled over me. This wouldn't stop. The doctors, the medicine, they couldn't fix this. Hiroshi was right. There was only one way. We convinced the doctors to give us a 24-hour leave for Ryota, claiming a family emergency. He was heavily sedated, almost zombie-like, but he was compliant. He knew, on some level, what we had to do.
Hiroshi found the bird and wrapped it carefully in a piece of white cloth. He wouldn't touch it with his bare hands. The drive north was silent and heavy with dread. Ryota sat in the back, staring out the window, his expression vacant. The sky was the same ominous gray as the day we first went. Finding the trail again was harder this time. It was as if the forest was actively trying to hide it from us. But Hiroshi seemed to be guided by some unseen instinct, pointing the way with a quiet certainty. When we stepped back under the canopy, the air was immediately colder, the silence more profound. This time, there were no sounds of life. No cicadas, no birds. Just the oppressive weight of the woods. The hike felt longer, the path steeper. We walked for what felt like an entire day. Ryota stumbled frequently, and Daiki and I had to support him. He was mumbling to himself, fragments of words we couldn't understand. Finally, through the gloom, we saw it. The cabin. It looked worse than I remembered. Darker, more malevolent. The gaping hole of the window looked like a hungry mouth. The door was slightly ajar, beckoning us into its rotten core. "This is it," Hiroshi said, his voice barely a whisper. "Ryota, you have to be the one to put it back. You have to place it exactly where you found it." Ryota looked at the cabin, and for the first time, a flicker of lucid terror crossed his face. He started to shake his head, whimpering. "I can't," he whispered. "She's in there. I can't." "We'll be right behind you," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We won't let anything happen to you." Hiroshi unwrapped the bird and placed it in Ryota's trembling hands. Ryota flinched as if it had burned him, but he held on. Slowly, like a man walking to his own execution, he approached the cabin. We followed him to the threshold, but stopped there. This was his act to perform, his apology to make. He stepped inside. We watched from the doorway, our flashlights cutting beams into the darkness. He moved slowly towards the corner with the mattress. The air inside seemed to shimmer, to grow thick and heavy like water. The cold was so intense, it was painful. Ryota knelt, his whole body shaking. He reached out with the bird, and as his hand extended, the humming started. It was louder this time, clearer. It seemed to come from all around us, from the very walls of the cabin. It was a simple, sad, looping melody. Ryota froze, his hand hovering over the floor. "I'm sorry," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any disrespect. Please, just take it back. Please." He placed the wooden bird on the dusty floor where he had found it. For a heartbeat, there was silence. And then, the room was filled with a sound. It was not the humming. It was the sound of a child weeping. A heartbroken, inconsolable sob that seemed to tear through the fabric of the world. It was a sound of such immense loneliness and sorrow that it broke my heart. The temperature dropped so far that our breath plumed in the flashlight beams. A powerful, unseen force slammed the crooked door shut, plunging us into darkness, with Ryota still inside. We screamed his name, throwing our shoulders against the door. It wouldn't budge. It was as if it were made of solid rock. From inside, we could hear Ryota screaming in abject terror, his cries mixing with the heartbreaking sobs of the child. "Help me! Oh God, get me out!" We slammed against the door again and again, our panic rising to a fever pitch. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The weeping stopped. Ryota's screams stopped. The pressure against the door vanished. It swung inward on its own, revealing the dark, empty room. Ryota was crumpled on the floor, unconscious, his face streaked with tears and dirt. But he was breathing. He was alive. We didn't wait. Daiki and I grabbed Ryota, hauling him up between us, and we ran. We ran, and we did not look back. We fled the cabin, fled the silent, watching woods, and didn't stop until we burst out of the tree line and back onto the dirt road, gasping in the clean, open air as the sun began to set. Ryota recovered, physically at least. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital and had no memory of returning to the cabin. In fact, his memory of the entire month after our first trip was a foggy, nightmare-laced blur. He never spoke of the humming or the girl in his apartment again, but he was changed. The arrogant, life of the party Ryota was gone forever, replaced by a quiet, somber man who startled at loud noises and could never quite bring himself to be alone in the dark. He put in for a transfer and left Okinawa a few months later. I never heard from him again. Our group of friends fell apart after that. The shared trauma was too great a weight for the friendship to bear. We couldn't look at each other without seeing the cabin, without hearing that terrible, sorrowful weeping. I still have my camera from that day. I never deleted the photos. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I pull them up on my computer. They're all there. The overexposed shot of the trailhead, the tense faces on the hike, the grim reality of our cold camp, and the ones from inside the cabin, the corrupted images of the drawings, and the one I took right before our headlamps died. It's mostly black, but if I push the exposure levels all the way up, cranking the digital brightness to its absolute limit, I can just make something out in the grainy, pixelated gloom of the corner. It's faint, a mere suggestion of a shape in the shadows behind where Ryota was standing. A small, translucent figure. The figure of a little girl with dark, hollow eyes, watching us, watching him, waiting for him to take what was hers, so she would no longer have to be alone.